Well, it's lovely to be here with you both in such a fantastic setting. My name is Stella. I'm the Managing Director of InvestorHub. We're a software company that builds for publicly listed companies here in the UK and Australia. We help them to form direct connections with investors without using intermediaries and third parties. We work with about 180 issuers across both the Australian and UK markets. And essentially what we're doing for them is helping them to figure out, one, who all of their investors are so that they can connect with them directly. And then once they have that connection and data, what do you do with that to ensure that you're engaging them well and ultimately retaining them as investors? What about you, Sam?
Hi, yeah, I'm Sam from Atticus. We're a verification platform designed for companies to work collaboratively on the disclosure process in all the kind of comms and corporate reporting aspects that they will be going on with year on year. We have about 24,000, just over, professionals working across our platform. Globally, we have customers in Australia, UK, increasingly in more jurisdictions who also do dual listing reporting. I think what the key thing we help them with is ultimately having a sort of defensible record for disclosure, so that when they issue their reports, they can actually track kind of the obligations and the statements they're making to the market in a much easier way than the traditional, which I'm sure we'll get into in our conversation, manner.
And I'm Hardeep Tamana, Managing Director of Avenir Registrars. We're a digital registrars supporting issuers of both equity issuing companies as well as debt securities, and we support them both in the UK and in Ireland. We have a large number of issuers on both sides, and these issuers effectively use our tools, mainly the digital platforms, to outreach to their holders who are sometimes not in the dematerialized systems. So we effectively end up juggling the words dematerialization as well as digitization for our issuers, and those issuers often are connecting out to at the end to their holders, and they need the most efficient mechanisms to deliver those, and we effectively channel or provide the delivery channels to those to the issuers to reach out to their holders.
So all of our businesses are involved in investor engagement, which is what we're here to talk about, in slightly different ways. Maybe we can start by just going through some of the key challenges that each of us are seeing issuers face with regards to investor engagement. So, from our perspective, there's three key things. The first one is cost. It's becoming increasingly expensive to do everything in public markets, but as it relates to investor engagement, the cost of communication, whether it's getting the right distribution, tailoring your message to the right people, the service providers involved, all of it's getting more expensive. And even from a time perspective, there's more and more that people need to do, and still a very finite amount of time. The second thing we're seeing is a change in investor expectations, the way that investors are expecting to receive information, and more importantly, the frequency with which they're expecting to receive information has really changed. And that makes a lot of sense. I mean, we look at how customers expect to get a relationship with a brand or with any transaction. It is very different now to what it was 15 years ago. And I think that has really flowed across to how investors engage with companies as well. And then the third part, and Hardeep, this might be something that you've experienced at Avenir, issuers struggling with getting direct communications to investors that sit underneath nominee providers. So here in the UK, for the most part, if you have retail investors on your registrar, they will sit underneath an AJ Bell, a Hargreaves Lansdowne, etc. And without deeper discovery, you won't necessarily be able to identify who those people are, how they're responding to your news, but also have the ability to talk to them directly. And so that's something we've been trying to solve with our business. But what have you seen by way of challenges?
I'd simply say that the biggest thing issuers have is the connectivity. I think, Alex, you once said something quite interesting. You said it's balmy in this day and age that a big corporation will have direct connection to its customers, but when it comes to shareholders, that connectivity is broken to a large extent. Yeah. And it is simply because of old mechanisms that have existed. So we battle for our issuers on two fronts. One is that connectivity to engage with the, with the counterparties they face, the nominee effectively or custodians they've got out into the market. But again, that connectivity can be smoothed to a certain extent and data collected, but the collection timeframes are still longer than they ought to be. Even with SRD2 disclosure requirements, it takes far too long. Yet, there are moves afoot to try to simplify that. In a similar manner, you've got the whole area of corporate actions that are still a bit outdated, in the sense that you run a rights issue, or one of our issues does that. Collecting payments are still by check to an extent, and they can't pick up electronically. You'd have thought in this day and age we could be there, and we are doing everything we can to speed that process up. But again, that happens in takeovers. There's a very paper-heavy process still taking place, and those paper processes are effectively things that we are tackling by introducing things like, for those direct holders, certainly by using mechanisms like a holder portal, whereby they can engage directly on the portal and communicate with the issuer. But the issuer also then has direct information about them. It's, as we go back to it, it's the nominees and the custodians where the difficulty comes in, because each of them have their own agreements and contracts with their holders.
And I love that framing, that companies already have a very well-established process on the operational side for how they deal with their customers, and they are used to getting all of that first-party data from the outset and using that to inform their process. But to your point, structurally, that's been quite difficult up until now. But I think we're both working on ways on how we can make that a little bit simpler.
Absolutely. I echo both of those points. I think what we're seeing in the market is listed companies, issuers taking a much more kind of process-orientated, if you will, optimized approach to how they engage with their investors. And what we mean by that is paper process, and trying to make that process a lot smoother, remove some of the bottlenecks that you're often coming up against. From our sort of perspective, we work a lot with disclosure, the reporting cycle, comms on websites and the like. And what we see is a sea of paper, a sea of emails, a sea of Word documents, lots of changes going on in documents all the time. The potential for that kind of cost aspect going up, with it really like uncapped from a time and resource perspective, but also on top of that, like the risk of actually just missing something. And I think one of the big challenges that companies are facing, if you look at the broader sort of economic climate that we're in at the moment, is there is a lot of unpredictability out there, fair amount of volatility. I think we can all agree. With that comes, the potential for investors to actually not be doing so well with their investments, and a potential sort of increase in activism. So companies are really sort of looking at ways to ensure they have a defensible record against what they're saying to their investors, alongside also making the process of engagement with their investors for themselves a lot easier, and then for their investors a lot more transparent.
If I was to wrap that up, and this is something that technology does very well, ensure accuracy, allow you to speak directly with people in a one-to-many way, and just do all of that at scale. And so along that vein, what are some of the applications that you guys are seeing for technology in solving these problems? Maybe we can start with Sam.
Yeah, I think one of the key things with technology, hopefully you'll agree with me, I think it's always about just identifying real pain points, like real problems that you have on a day-to-day basis. They don't have to be pervasive across the whole organization, but they have to be big enough to warrant a change. I think one of the things that we see a lot in our business is ultimately around just the manual method of dealing with lots of different emails, drafts, teams within the organization, actually collaboration. And one of the core parts of our platform is about the ability to collaborate in a more seamless way at the right time and getting the right people across the right information. And then one of the other challenges, going to your point, Hardeep, earlier around sort of data record, and do you have that audit trail that, as you say, when you're dealing with your customer, you may actually have systems in place to record any support or complaints processes. But when you're dealing with investors, that's not always, and the market in general, always easy to come by, because you may be having a sort of more manual sort of database entry, if not just kind of recollection in your head or on certain sort of siloed documents. So we're bringing that all together, and I think the opportunity is for companies to work more seamlessly across teams in the way they report to their investors, so that everything they say ultimately is, with full confidence.
Yeah, on that point, I mean, that aligns with a really big trend we're seeing around having that primary system of record as it relates to your investor relations. So, and it's sort of what you were saying before, it is now possible for a company to identify who all of their beneficial owners are, who all of their prospective investors are, and much like they would with their customers, start to bring all of that data into one place so that they can match that with what's happening internally and affect much more of a scientific marketing approach to how they manage the process. Yeah. And so, well, we know who these people are now. We have data around how they're engaging with our business. We can use that to figure out what do we need to say, when do we need to say it, and because we're doing it directly, we can save a lot of money, going back to that first challenge, and we can more quickly respond to changing investor expectations because we can talk to them as many times as we want in whatever format we'd like.
This touches that point that what are the investor expectations as well. In this day and age, those investors do expect digital platforms to communicate. They don't expect the old-fashioned postal documents to arrive, yet there's still so much of postage going on, as we've both discussed.
And it's expensive.
Yeah, and it is. It adds to the layers of cost for these companies. Now, our issues typically are, battling partly that, and so there's the paper-based side that they're battling. But in addition to that, once they get past it, we provide them the mechanisms to sort of communicate with those holders, have that engagement. You still have those expectations that the holders in the nominees then have, because again, that mechanism of communicating through other channels and finding a timely mechanism whereby, for example, back to a rights issue, it's communicated quickly through the chain, and sometimes there are other logistical issues that come up with communicating abroad. So there might be holders from outside the country who are holding through a chain of nominees, and what we found there is, again, you need to deploy imaginative solutions. You need to be able to say, yes, that's the formal mechanism that's going to go through Crest or through Euroclear, whichever mechanism the holders are channeled through, but by knowing those end holders through the sort of notices that we've got, to get out to them and email them even and communicate with their corporate actions department. So it's all about making that communication work. So once you've done all that analysis, got the data, you want to communicate something, the job of registrars then is to make sure that gets through. So our work for our issuers is always, they have a need, they need to get through that communication in a timely manner to their end holders, is how to deliver that in as good and as quick a manner as possible. So that becomes the big thrust of the type of operations we work on.
Yeah. Look, we could talk about this for a very long time, but in the interest of time, maybe we can leave everyone watching this with one key takeaway or suggestion for either an issuer or an IRO that might be listening to this video, if they're looking to apply more technology to how they affect their investor engagement program. What would your one piece of advice be? Maybe we'll start with Sam.
Sure, yeah. I think one of the key things would be just kind of considering what is the actual problems that you're facing? What are the actual challenges? Can you put a number around it? Can you put some form of time spent around it? Obviously, that's not always easy, but I think understanding your existing process is the most important thing around that. So that the problem, and I can give you perhaps a little example here. Looking forward also beyond the challenge to the opportunity that the technology presents. I think when you've understood the problem, you validated the issue, you've then validated the technology that could kind of help you with that issue. What else does it do for you? So a number of our customers we've seen recently in the FTSE 100 and 250 are now using our platform as an internal control in itself in the process of satisfying new regulatory requirements. And the changing landscape is necessitating the need for disclosure across more and more information, including the sustainability. Having sort of a broader overview of the existing challenge, but then what the technology that you're looking at could offer you from an opportunities perspective going forward and actually improving things is, I think, a really, really big one to focus on, yeah.
I'd simply remind every issuer to think about the infrastructure behind the communications channels. It's, get to make sure that whatever registrar you're engaging doesn't just think mechanics of delivery, but thinks beyond mechanics of actually starting to say, how do we actually make sure those communications reach the end recipients as quickly and as efficiently as possible. And then not only that, have mechanisms to collect that data back, because that's exactly what the issuer wants. So relying on things that are potentially still outdated, or mechanisms that are using paper, you definitely need to move as quickly to a digital platform, and those digital platforms will allow you to get the answers you want more quickly.
Ideally, they should go with one of the digital first registrars.
Yes.
And then, look, the main bit of advice I'd have would be, up until now, the way that I think the market has looked at applying technology has been changing how we do traditional activities or workflows. So, like, great example, following the pandemic, sort of out of necessity, but also ease, it became necessary for everyone to use webinars as your main way of communicating through an AGM or through a results period. But my challenge to everyone would be, let's start looking at what we're doing and why we're doing it. So is a webinar actually the best way of communicating with investors? Is it what people want? Is it the best way to get context? Is it the best way to do Q&A? Technology offers us so many different ways to answer all of these. There might be more out-of-the-box creative solutions that we can do other than just doing what we've always done. And then to your point, I'd echo that with everything we do, we should have very clear measures of ROI behind it, which is also something that technology enables. But anyway, thank you both.
Thanks so much.
And
Great
thank
speaking
you.
with you.
Thank you likewise.